Hi everyone, my name is Camille and this is my video presentation for labor unions, why they were founded, and whether or not they remain relevant still today. Um, Initially, labor unions were founded in order to ensure the safety and fair pay of workers. The earliest labor union can be dated back as early as 1768. The first formal gathering, formal group, was closer to the end of that century in the 1790s. The 1800s, there were still labor unions, but there was a distinction between trade unionism and labor reform. It wasn't until later in the 1800s that they kind of morphed together. Now, once the next century turned and we got into the 1900s, trade unions actually became inactive just before the Great Depression. It wasn't until Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal came out that it included a collective bargaining point in the legislation, and so the Committee for Industrial Organization was created. And that's really what kicked labor unions off again. And by the end of World War II, more than 12 million workers belonged to unions. And that idea of collective bargaining was key throughout all the industries. Well, a lot of industries anyways. Now, union membership continued to grow until the 1970s, and then once communications and transportation was deregulated, that allowed for new foreign competitors to pop up in the market, and in those heavily unionized industries. And in the 1970s, unions lost more than 5 million members, and that continued through the 1980s. And by the end of the 1980s, less than 17% of American workers belonged to unions. That number has shifted today. It's actually grown even more. And that I did not find out, but that's okay. Anyways, so again, still unions, their whole initiative is still to maintain that relationship between employee and employer. They are a go-between for people so that they can negotiate things like pay raises, vacation time, health benefits, and then also, most importantly, ensure the safety of the working conditions for people. One of their most, what I think, when I think of labor unions, one of their biggest successes is the end of child labor. Way back when I did a history presentation on the history of child labor, and unions were instrumental in ending that. And so that was very important, because otherwise, our 5-year-olds would still be working in sweatshops, and that's not okay. But still today, they remain relevant. I'll just list some of the pros that I did find. Obviously, they provide worker protections. On average, union members make 30% more than workers in the same industry that are not part of the union. 92% of workers also have job-related health care coverage as well. And so, as we know, as the cost of everything is going up, those health care costs, negotiating those can be very difficult sometimes. Unions also tend to be economic trendsetters, and what that means is they really are key in driving aspects of the economy, so that when you're in a bear market or a bull market, when the economy is growing or in a recession, then unions are very involved in that. Something that also unions do is they give employees more power versus going to your boss as an individual. They're more employers are more likely to negotiate with a union versus, if I went in by myself. They are also associated with higher productivity, lower turnover, improved workplace communication, and a better trained workforce as well. They protect workers also from unjust firing. If an employer has to have just cause in order to fire a union member, otherwise, as an at-will employee, an employer does not have to have a cause to fire you. Some unions offer education scholarships, hardship assistance, for disability and job loss grants, mortgage assistance, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of pros to being in a union. There are also some cons. Now, unions also require dues and fees from their workers, and that can be anywhere from 1.5% to 2.5% of their pay, which could be considered unfair. Unions also discourage individuality. For example, I couldn't, even if I were a part of a union, I couldn't go to my employer and say, hey, I would like to do this. I'd like a nickel raise or something. I would have to go to my union rep instead. Also, unions make it harder to promote. So instead of someone that is qualified getting the job, unions can discount that education and experience, and someone can not get promoted. They promote based on seniority over merit, is what I'm trying to say. And also, unions tend to drive up the cost of goods. When employers have to pay employees more, then the cost of those goods and services could also go up, which leads me to some cons for employers. Higher labor costs. When members strike, they also lose production and also could decrease their sales volume as well. Because when people are sympathizing with people that are on strike, then that usually makes the national news, and you can see a trickle-down effect. Anyways, also decreased human resources control. Again, you must promote based on seniority, not on merit. Disciplining union employees is very difficult because a union rep is usually involved. There's always a third party. There are often more lawsuits and arbitrations, and there's extra accounting on the bookkeeper's part for union dues. So, are they still necessary? Yes and no. My personal opinion, again, for what it's worth, I think they were necessary. I like to think that they're not necessarily necessary anymore. I think a lot of employers are much more fair. Now again, my company, we don't have a union that we can belong to, but I don't have a lot to compare it to, but we have some pretty amazing benefits. So I also think, though, too, that unions have gotten a little greedy. Again, it kind of depends on the union and that sort of thing, but I don't know that I can make an argument one way or the other, again, because there's pros and cons to both sides, but I think mandating unions um, is a little touchy. Um, so yeah, so that's what I found on labor unions, and yeah, are they relevant? Yes. Are they necessary? Not really. So, but there you go. Have a good day.